And it's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel and a very special guest today, Jack Kelly, rower. And Judge, you were the person who arranged for Jack to be on the program. So I might throw to you straight off to start the ball rolling.
Thanks. Welcome, Jack. Welcome back.
Thanks, Jack.
Our rowing guy. He's not just a rower, by the way. He's a trivia master par excellence, and he's also a young lawyer doing very well. However, it's about rowing that we got you in today, Jack. Tell us a little bit about your background, just so we can prove you got some credibility in what you're talking about.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for that, Jack. So, I started rowing at school, would have been about 2008. After school, I went on with my club rowing, ended up going on, won a couple of Australian national championships, and also won national championships in New Zealand and Canada. Then I was trying to make the national team for a few years, both as a heavyweight and a lightweight. So I got reasonably close as a lightweight, went up to trial in Canberra, but ultimately never made the team. And then the last sort of couple of years that I was rowing competitively, so sort of 2018, 2019, I was trying to race and win at Henley Royal Regatta over in England. So we were the runner-up in 2018 and we made the semi-final in 2019. And that's sort of where I finished up with the competitive rowing. So the last couple of years has been just taking it a bit easier, doing an odd regatta here and there.
Good on you, Jack. Look, we specifically want to talk to you today about the Olympics, rowing Olympics. Can you just give us a bit of an idea of the rowing program at the Olympics?
Yeah, sure. So you've got four, I guess, sort of categories. You've got the heavyweight men, heavyweight women, and lightweight women. These are the sort of last Olympics that you'll see the lightweight events at. So they've cut them down from 2016. You've only got a lightweight men's and women's double. So you used to have a whole litany of events for the lighties, but they're phasing that out. Apparently it's a direction from the IOC. They don't want weight-based categories anymore.
Is that controversial, Jack, that's the case?
Yeah, lightweight rowing's got a pretty long history. So there's a lot of people very unhappy with that. At the end of the day, I think probably World Rowing didn't fight too hard for it. Because they are already under a lot of pressure in other areas to reduce numbers and things like that. There's a lot of numbers involved in rowing. If you've got 10 eights competing, that's already 80 or 90 athletes when you consider there's coxes as well. So they're trying to cut down on the number of athletes overall. And I think they, in fighting to keep some of the other stuff, they've let the lightweights go, basically.
I was going to say, no disrespect, I wasn't aware of the lightweight heavyweight categories. Is it more of an advantage to be a smaller man in the boat, or do you want to be a behemoth? Who's going to row faster? Because you don't want to be built like a 2-iron with ears, for example, you know?
Yeah, no, you generally want to be heavier. You generate more force behind the handle, more force on the blade. So a heavier crew will be faster up to a certain point, obviously. So the lighties are slower, and it's basically a division for some of the lighter and shorter guys. So the taller and the heavier you are, the better you are generally.
I was going to say, we can't see your shoulders there, but I'm sure they're pretty impressive.
They're all right. I mean, I was a lighty for a little bit as well. So they're not crazy like some.
So Jack, tell us the typical profile of a heavyweight rower. For a start, how heavy are they? And then tell us about the Australian team and the fellows that you know in the boat.
Yeah, sure. So a typical heavyweight rower, if you're looking at an Olympian, you wouldn't find many guys under about 6'3", 6'4". They're all pretty big guys, and weight. They probably weigh 90 to 100 kilos. Some of the really big guys. There's a bloke on the British team who's probably about 6'9", 6'10", and 115 kilos. So some of them are just massive. You get to a point of a bit of diminishing returns though. So as a general rule for a heavyweight, yeah, you're looking probably 90 to 100 kilos, and probably averaging around 6'5".
And what age, Jack? Sorry, what age is there an optimal age? Because I understand there's some fairly young rowers in the Australian boats.
Yeah, so a mate of mine's the youngest on the team at 20. His name's Angus Dawson. He's racing in the men's 8. He stayed with my family a couple of years ago when he was training for the under-23 world champs, which he won. So he's the youngest. There's a Norwegian rower called Olaf Tufte. He's 45 years old and he's back for his 7th Olympics. He's a Norwegian farmer, so he spends 6 months of the year farming and 6 months of the year rowing. So he's a bit of a character. Otherwise, on the Australian team, you're looking at probably 20. 20 is the youngest. Most people are mid-20s. You need that time to sort of develop the skill in the fitness space. You won't find many 18 or 19-year-olds. Angus is a bit of an outlier at 20. And then just the commitment so much. You don't see many people sticking around into their 30s. It's a full-time job, especially these days. You have to live either full-time in Canberra or Penrith, and you can't do anything else. It's a full-time employment training and just rowing. So it doesn't leave a lot of scope for much else.
I was going to say that I do the rugby league segment. The physicality wouldn't be far off rugby league in terms of you don't see many young players. I'm talking 18, 17, 19, that age, because the physical requirements of the game, you just wouldn't last. And no doubt rowing similar, just that endurance you just wouldn't find in someone that young. Yeah,
that's right. And the sort of strength as well. You need years to build up enough strength to compete at that sort of level. You're not going to be able to find many 18-year-olds that are able to do that. I think James Tompkins and Drew Ginn both came in at about 18, and they were certainly sort of, freaks in that sense. They were very young for coming in.
Jack, financially, how would you, I imagine, the Olympics only come around 4 years. I imagine there's world champs, I presume, every year. But really, how do you finance yourself in doing this?
So the rowers are supported by Gina Reinhardt. So she's sort of taken over the funding of the rowing, essentially. So she pays a salary. It varies based on how well you did over the last season. So I think if you're a gold medalist at the World Champs, you're looking at, I think, 80 to 90,000, and if you're new on the team, it might be 50 to 60 roughly. So she and her foundation pay for all the rowers, pay their salaries. Same, I think she does for the swimmers or some of the swimmers. So that's good of her. She's taken that on, and it means that the Australians are basically able to live and row full time. And compete that way.
Just on the mental side, I've read a bit about it. It's similar, they say, to the Tour de France. It's one of those sports where you would reach what they call a breaking point, and we've just had State of Origin, and the players say they reach a point where they are at breaking point. How do you get through that zone? Can you feel it coming and you just have to get yourself through it? Because there'd certainly be a point in a race where you've pushed yourself right to your limit. How do you mentally get yourself through it?
There's a lot of training that goes into it. So just doing it over and over and over again, you start to learn what your limits are and what your absolute limits are. You learn that there's only a certain amount of effort you can give over a race. And you have to try and moderate that. You can go out and you can try and get the lead in the first 750 meters and hold on for the last 1250, but you're going to have a pretty rough time doing so. And everyone racing has done it so often and at such a high level that they know that if they go out, any one of them could be in the lead after 750 if they really wanted to be, but they wouldn't be there at the end. So yeah, mentally it's pretty tough. You get a bit of a tunnel vision. It's in some of the races, the effort you give, you sort of start to lose focus. Your vision starts to blur a bit, and it all sort of really starts to get a bit rough. There's a few different things people do. So there's a lot of caffeine. They tried to ban caffeine at one point, or caffeine pills. That's now changed because it was such a weird, ridiculous rule that was so hard to enforce because people would have 12 short blacks instead. And they just couldn't tell what was a caffeine pill and what wasn't. guys are loading up on bicarb soda these days, which apparently counteracts all the lactic acid. So the lactic acid's a major thing. After about 600 meters, you've generated so much lactic that it's just going to burn, and your body can't get rid of that while you're still rowing. So you're basically hitting this pain threshold, and then you've got to sit there and essentially tolerate that for as long as you can, and hopefully make it to the end without dropping off too much.
Jack, what's the Australia's chances at the Olympics, both in the men and the women?
So the men, you've got the men's fours, probably our best bet for a gold. They're the priority boat, so they've got all our top 4 rowers in that. You've got Josh Booth, who's back for his 3rd Olympics. He's the only 3-time Olympian on the rowing team. So the men's 4 is probably the one to watch on the men's side. The men's 8 will also have a good shot. So I've got a few mates across the men's 8. They're largely some younger guys in that. For the women, it's a similar story. You got the women's 4, they're probably our top boat. They've won multiple gold medals throughout the last sort of Olympiad over the last 4 or 5 years now. And the women's 8 also, they're going to be right up there. They'll almost certainly medal, and hopefully can push for gold. They're a bit interesting. They've changed it now. You can have coxes of either gender at the Olympics. So we've got a male cox in the women's and men's 8. Who the one in the women's 8's a mate of mine. He's from Melbourne, and Cox is in Melbourne when he's not on the national team.
Gelding, you've got a question.
Yeah, Jack, just a quick question to you. Why are Australian rowers so good on the world stage? In the Olympic history, the cyclists and the rowers are always amongst the Australian best teams. Is there any particular reason why we do it so well in Australia, or is it just that the thing is there is some reason for it, but we seem to outshine other countries with larger populations?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that go into it. We've got a long rowing tradition, so we've always had that sort of setup and infrastructure in Australia. It used to be, going back to the early 1900s, like a very massive social event. So we've always had that. We've always had the boathouses on the Yarra River and, in various places throughout Sydney and Brisbane and Adelaide. So that goes into it. It's also a very expensive sport. So I think we're pretty lucky in that we're a very affluent country, and there's a lot of countries that just simply can't afford to give that sort of infrastructure that they need to train someone up from, a beginner to an elite level. The Olympic boats, it'll cost 90 grand per boat. So yeah, you need a lot of money. There's a lot of money essentially at the end of the day that goes into it, and a lot of countries can't fund that, and they can't get that sort of set up off the ground because you'd be waiting for 10 years to see any results, and that whole time you're pouring money into it and you're not going to see anything. It takes, China's probably the only country that's come out in the last 40 years that wasn't already a rowing nation. So they've come out in the last, probably since 2008, have come on and they've had a few good crews, particularly in the women. But outside of China, it's been the same rowing powerhouses, probably going back to about 1900.
Okay.
I'm just going to say
we do seem to perform exceptionally well come the Olympics in every Olympics it's been. We've been very strong compared to, say, in England and America and all those. They seem to be just outperforming them.
Paul.
Yeah, I think that's true. We've got our sort of what you might call our pet categories. So the fours for the men's and women's. We focus on that. And there's also a bit of, I don't know if you call it gamesmanship. There's a bit of an understanding between the different countries. Australia will target the fours. Britain and Germany will target the eights. And then smaller countries will target, the doubles and the singles, where if they're a smaller country, they're not going to have 4 or 8 guys that are going to be at that level. So they might try and get 1 or 2 guys and say go target the pair or the double or do something like that. But yeah, I agree. We've certainly got a long history of doing really well. and it comes down to probably numbers and training as well. We get a lot of rowers coming through high school, across every single state. Really, every single state's got a pretty strong rowing setup. So there's really a chance.
Ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you talk us through the difference? And this is for the uninitiated. Your cox, that's the person at the end of the boat with the megaphone.
Yeah.
Do you get a different style in your cox there? Are there certain types that might get a bit personal, or do they keep it quite technical and structured? Like what gets you going there with the rowing action? What can really fire you up best?
I'd probably lean to having someone a bit more technical. When you're in a race, like when you're in the middle of a race, I find I don't need too much motivation. You've got the crews there next to you. You've been doing it long enough. You know how to push yourself. What you really need is technical cues. If something's slipping, for example, technically, that can lead to pretty dramatic changes in speed, or even minor changes in speed can be a big difference. Then for other people, it is about getting up and about and getting someone who's really motivating and in their face and getting them to pull harder. And ultimately, a cox is picked by the crew, so the crew will vote on who they want the cox to be. And it'll come down to the personality of the crew and what they like. So the guy that's coxing the women's 8 this year, for example, James Rook, he's one of the ones that will try and get you up and about. A lot of energy, a bit of a larrikin, but all the girls there love him. He gets on really well with everyone, and I think they just enjoy having him around. He's a great influence on the crew. Whereas the guy that's coxing the men's 8 this year is called Stuart Sim. He's probably more on the technical side, very well versed in everything that you need to go fast, and he'll be on them and watching them and making sure catches are all in time. Everyone's hitting the right lengths, everything's going well, and keeping probably more of a calming influence on everyone.
Jack, you're our go-to rowing guy. I think, Professor, we'll get Jack back another time. There's two things that come up today is the influence of Gina Reinhardt on rowing, and I can tell you other sports. She's an unsung hero of Australian sport, Gina Reinhardt. And also I'd like to talk to you about rowing for the average person. We always talk about the elite, but as I understand it, rowing is a fantastic sport for just about anybody for a whole range of reasons. So we'll get you back another day, Jack, to talk about that. But Gelding, you got a last question for Jack?
Oh, look, it was just, again, sorry, John, to interrupt on all that. Jack, it seems a very tactical type of sport, and I suppose that's where the cox is kind of, setting the rating of the boat and things like that. Maybe you could just explain that. And I did always listen with interest when they said the water's very fast today, or there's lanes that the water's suiting. Can you kind of comment on those things just quickly?
I was just going to say quickly, Gelding, if Gay Waterhouse was a cox, they'd be going out like a greyhound. The boat would be 20 lengths in front of everyone else.
They'd be leading early.
So tactics are a bit different in each boat. The single scull is the most tactical because it's the longest race, it's the slowest boat, and there's most time for you to do something. Mm-hmm. Boats like the 8, you basically just go. So you're done in just over 5 minutes. So everyone's just going as fast as they can the whole time. The boats are moving so fast that it's hard to get much of a sort of on anyone else.
Yep.
So the coxes are only in the 8s, and so they're trying to basically keep on them the whole time. Stuff like the 4s and the doubles are interesting because you've got to make your own calls. So I used to sit my last few years rowing, I'd sit in the 2-seat of a 4 and make all the calls. And you can't say much. So you've almost got a code between everyone, just single syllable codes, and each means something different. And so you'll be making those calls as you come down the course, and everyone knows, and you've practiced it so much, you know what the response is. In terms of sort of fast water, it's all a bit course dependent. So if you're up at Penrith, you want to be sort of near the shelter. There's trees on one side. Whereas, if you're racing over in Perth, you have the Fremantle doctor come in sometimes, and you can set world record times just with the tailwind that's blown up. This year at Tokyo, they're racing in Tokyo Bay between a couple of man-made islands that they've reclaimed. So it's salt water. So the boats are going to be sitting up higher. They're going to be a lot faster because there's less drag. So you're going to be looking at some really fast times this year if the wind gets in the right direction.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks.
And listen, that's been very informative, and I think you'd agree, Professor. We'll get Jack back.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Before I let you go, Jack, there was one question I had for you. I looked at the Olympic team selection.
Yeah.
And I saw that almost 75% of the team are debutants for this Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Given that mid-20s is about the age range, there's a very small window for most rowers to make it to an Olympic team. Would those figures seem to tell that story?
Yeah, I think that's pretty right. There's one other factor with the Australian team is it's the first Olympics that we've had since we started the national training centres. So they came in 2016, and a lot of people quit at that point. So previously, you'd be able to, you'd have the Australian men's four rowing out of Melbourne, and you might have the men's eight rowing out of Sydney. Everyone on the men's team has to go live in Canberra these days. So a lot of the older guys, who had families or established in certain places, they weren't prepared to do that. So they've lost a lot of the guys from 2016. They haven't wanted to come back. So that's another reason it's probably a bit higher this time round. Okay,
probably a bit of a false positive.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Most people, I think you'll see a lot of people from this one, especially with only 3 years to 2024, probably stick around. There'll be a lot more returning, in 2024.
Okay, Jack, thanks very much for your contribution today. Much appreciated as always. And we'll take the judge up on his offer and maybe get back to you after the Olympics and talk a bit more about rowing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks very much.
Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
All right, NBA, Dan, been sitting there patiently. The Suns and the Bucks, half-time in Game 5 and not much the difference. Both teams have won on their home court.
Yeah, it's keeping my streak alive here, Mark. I think, I said the Suns would probably get 4-1, win the series 4-1. And since we last spoke, the Bucks have won 2 straight, and they're up at halftime. So, for all those listeners, they know don't listen to me for picks. I'm always, for some reason, I pick somebody and say the other team goes nuts. But, second half has started. Milwaukee already off to an early start, 67-63 in the third quarter right now. So high scoring. Both teams going at it in Phoenix, and it's going to be exciting to see how this one finishes.
Dan, this game has been a bit topsy-turvy. The Phoenix Suns shot their asses off in the first quarter to lead by, I think it was 16 at quarter time, and then the reverse happened in the second quarter, and the Milwaukee Bucks, they could hardly miss. So it's certainly set up for a really good second half here in the background.
No, absolutely. They're shooting over 50% for the first half. I mean, it's crazy. 10 of 19 3-pointers. So it's definitely a great game to watch. And Phoenix just scored. So trying to pay attention to this one as we continue to talk here and see how this one comes out in the third. But I fully expect this will go down the wire. Could be one of those last second shot type games.
Do you think there's any particular home court advantage here, Dan? It just seems unusual that neither team's been able to break through on the opposition's court.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a home court, Mark. I think that's one of the benefits of, going from a season that started with nobody in the stands to a season that now is pretty much full capacity at these places. So the players, as more and more fans have come into the stands, more and more excitement is created by the teams that are playing. So I definitely think the home court is a big advantage, particularly this year more than any.
Chris Paul was pretty quiet in Game 4 with 10 points. They need more from him, the Suns, if they're going to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. As we talked last week, I mean, he's definitely the quarterback. He's the guy that's leading that team. He is the senior member of a very young team. How Chris Paul goes, so goes the Suns. So see what he's got here in this half.
Yeah, this start to the half, Dan, has been pretty hot.
Yeah, they're going at it. I mean, again, 74-69 just at the beginning of this thing. So it's crazy. But Chris Paul right now, 18 minutes. And I'm seeing 9 points. So they're down 5 points. It just goes to show as he goes, so goes the Suns.
Dan, do you think what this is showing as well is that you don't need to have the main city teams in the competition or in the finals to make it interesting. Like neither Milwaukee or Phoenix would be deemed to be main street media. They're not from LA. They're not from New York. But I'll tell you what, this series we're seeing some absolute future superstars in particular Phoenix with Devin Booker, Bridges and the like. And then we're watching Giannis, who is an absolute freak of an athlete. He amazing.
Yeah, he just got blocked by DeAndre Ayton, so it's fun to watch those two big guys go at it. But there's definitely you watch this team. I mean, obviously, if Milwaukee is fully healthy, I think Milwaukee would win this series. But Milwaukee, with their injuries, has really particularly the first two games struggled here. But this one is just I think Coutta, it is a situation. If you're a basketball junkie, you just want the two best teams in it. You don't care if it's the LA teams, New York teams, Chicago, Miami. You just want the best teams from the season playing against each other in a battle just like this one's happening right now. Give me basketball, give me high scoring, give me buckets going through, give me blocks in your face type shots. I mean, that's exactly what this series and this game's all about. These teams know that this game today is the most important of the series. Whoever gets this one goes up 3-2 and has the best potential to win this final series.
And Dan, the block in the last game by Giannis, is that one of the best that you've ever seen, especially considering the timing?
Oh, absolutely. Given the timing of it, given the lateness of the game, and everything was on the line with that bucket. So it absolutely goes to Michael Jordan last second shot type momentum. When you can play defense like that without fouling and block a shot that was probably going in, absolutely fantastic play.
And from an Australian perspective, we have got an interest here of a player that has played in the NBL before, and that is Torrey Craig. He gets a ring no matter what because he represented both teams at some stage during the season.
Yeah, it's not a bad gig. I mean, obviously you want your current team to win, but you were in training camp and everything else early in the season with your previous team. So absolutely, it's I hate to say a no lose situation, but you definitely want your current team to win to get that momentum going into next year, particularly if you're looking at a contract.
Dan, I'm not going to ask you to predict who the MVP of the finals will be, but from what you've seen over the first four games and this part of Game 5, who do you think the players are in the running for the MVP?
I think you're looking at Booker or Chris Paul. I think for Phoenix, depending on who wins it, it just depends on whether Chris Paul could turn it around here. And then obviously, I think Giannis is looking at it from Milwaukee if they end up winning that one. I think that block goes down, and I think that's where the media members will remember his key play there to turn the series. Okay, Dan. Well, you picked the Suns, so I guess you would hope that given they've won 8 of 10 playoff games in this series at home, you'd be hoping that they'll make that 9 out of 11. That's they're down 78-75 now. Again, just a hot start here in the third again. But yeah, I think again the home court is gonna win out here. I think Phoenix will find a way to win this one, which means Milwaukee will win. So. Okay, thanks for that, Dan. Thanks for the update. Paul, round 18 of NRL. Before we look at that, of course, the state of origin during the week. Always difficult to win the third game when you've won the first two. How did you see that play out?
I did say on air last week it was going to be tough for New South Wales. I said Queensland would fire up. It would be a much closer game. And I remember saying that someone of Kalen Ponga or Cameron Munster would step up, and we saw that with Kalen Ponga, absolute superstar of the game. He was pretty fired up all week, apparently in training, desperately wanted to win for Queensland. It put a smile back on a lot of people's dial. Paul Green went from looking like a zombie to looking alive again. Cherry Evans went from a sulky, petulant teenager to a bit of spring back in his step. Ponga, interestingly, is off contract end of this year. There's talk about the All Blacks circling with a $1.5 million a year, if you don't mind, Professor, or to $2 million. But he wants to stay and win a premiership for Newcastle on their club form. That might be some weight for poor old Kalen. But we're lucky that the game was close because it was looking like it was going to be a massacre. So what happened with New South Wales? Brad Fittler, I think, made a mistake. I'm more than happy as a Rabbitohs fan that he bypassed Cody Walker, who's in the form of his life, and he didn't go with him. He went instead with Mitchell Moses.
Well, he also
perform.
Paul. He also didn't select Adam Reynolds, which he could have.
That's right. And Adam Reynolds and Cody Walker would have been a much combination. Don't worry about Moses parting the Red Sea. He did nothing in that State of Origin Game 3. So that was not a great selection. And there's been a bit of bristling by Freddie Fittler and Greg Alexander, the team advisor, when asked why they bypassed the Rabbitohs duo. And you can always tell when someone's made a mistake when they bristle being put on the spot about it. So they couldn't confidently tell people as to why they did that. It didn't work. And the Blues looked pretty much rudderless. They looked directionless. So Queensland was more than happy to take advantage of that. They had enough stars on the park. Keep in mind they're missing their hooker, Harry Grant, who will add a lot next year. They'll have Munster in fine form, Ponga, Cherry Evans. So next year's series already looking like a close event. Speaking of Queensland, though, there was that slogan, remember, beautiful one day, perfect the next. I think it might have featured Lara Bingle in a bikini on a cricket pitch, but I tell you, Peter V'landys having Queensland save the whole game, Anastasia Palazek would have looked about as attractive as Lara Bingle in that bikini, because without Queensland, we wouldn't have a game, Professor. We wouldn't have a competition. They've put everyone up there in Queensland just to save this season. So you've got to understand how tight Sydney's lockdown is. But for Queensland stepping up, we wouldn't have any games to discuss now.
All right, Paul. Round 18. Let's not take it in order. Let's look at the Melbourne Storm, who run up another huge score. That's their 11th game for the year where they've scored more than 40 points. They've won 14 straight. No Addo-Carr, no Christian Welch. Jordan Grant in for an NRL debut. Nico Hines going crazy. Can anybody stop the Storm?
Well, the only problem they've got on their hands is to work out where Pappenhausen's going to fit back in, because Nico Hines would have to be possibly the best fullback in the game at the moment. So the Storm could possibly soon have the two best fullbacks in the game, and only one can wear the number one jersey. They broke a record that stood since 1935, if you don't mind, the Storm, in scoring as many points as they have this year. Unbelievable performance without Addo-Carr, as you said. Dale Finucane was knocked out as well early on. He's tougher than a cat's skull. So it's just been a tough game for the Storm, but they still managed to absolutely dismantle the Knights, who were missing Mitchell Pearce, but it was just a woeful performance. And I wonder whether that will play into whether Kalen Ponga will knock back the $1.5 million to $2 million a year being offered by the All Blacks. He's always stated that he wants to play for the All Blacks, and you can't hold that against someone the same as Roger Tabasov-Sheck at the Warriors. The way the Knights are going, he'd want to have some connection there, otherwise they're going to lose him to rugby union. And as we saw in the State of Origin, would be a massive loss to rugby league. A game I enjoyed seeing a bit of, the Raiders, big winners against the Sharks. They've got a fine young fullback playing his second game, Xavier Savage. Remember that name, Professor. He ran for more than most of the athletes will at the Olympics, 246 metres for Xavier in his second game at the back, and all with a bung shoulder. So he busted the shoulder, and he was pretty happy, Ricky Stewart, to see a player play through injury. Doctors probably weren't, but Sticky was, given the way that the Raiders are playing. He was pretty impressed with that performance. So that's a player to watch. And astoundingly, I'm not sure, I'll have to check the tape whether I put the red pen through the Raiders. They've got a bit of form up. They might even make the 8 the way they're playing, which seems astounding, but there's a real logjam around that 8th position, Professor, at the moment to sneak in. So,
Paul, the only interest is making the 8, because they've got no chance of winning the competition. It could be a top 4 this year. If Peter's honest, he could have a top 4 this year and play it over 3 weeks or whatever you want to, because the disparage or the difference in the competition we've discussed previously is greater than it's ever been. But the bottom will be interesting. The bottom of the top 8, who makes it and who can make it will be interesting, but they're just going to make up the numbers.
What I'm interested in, you've got hundreds of rugby league players on the Gold Coast. Do you think anything could go wrong there? My word. So I just hope that they're all stuck in their bubbles. They'd want to be pretty tight, those bubbles, because there'd be a lot of entertainment venues waiting for some players to break bubbles and to sneak in, because I wouldn't want to be the one in charge of keeping rugby league players out of mischief on the Gold Coast.
Well, Paul, the interesting part, of course, is that the the NRL players aren't on their own. They've also got the AFL players. So if you were ready for schoolies week, you might be able to bring that forward a little bit, because it could be absolute carnage up there.
Well, I think the Novatel's got the Dragons, the Sharks, and the Tigers all in the same hotel. So I'd hope they're on different floors, but that hotel bar could be pounded like a piñata if they don't keep an eye on it.
So, and the barbecue will be in use as well.
Oh, the barbecue at Vaughan's. But speaking of that, Professor, the Dog's about to sign Paul Vaughan. Can you believe it? So he's maybe for his catering skills.
Yeah, they needed somebody to run the barbecue, Paul.
How?
You're going to sign him, but the issue is going to be that his suspension, he's not allowed to serve while he's out of the game. So you're going to have to sign a bloke who'll be suspended for the first, I think, 8 games of the season. Now, you've got a big addition this week, and it's not a player, it's Gus Gild to run your shop. So Gus Gild must have rubber stamped this. Perhaps he thinks that he can be the saviour in his suits that don't fit. He can be the saviour for Paul Vaughan and get him off the barbecue tongs and back on the best players list, Professor.
Well, we can live in hope. Paul, something for Schooner. Manly with a big win over the Dragons. No Turbo, no Cherry Evans, no worries.
Well, Paul Vaughan took the barbecue tongs. He set that team alight, excuse the pun, and not in a good way. He's burnt that team to the ground with those suspensions. So if the Dragons weren't decimated by those suspensions caused by weekend at Vaughan's, they might have been a chance. But it was a very impressive win to Manly, and it shows what they can do. That's $3 million of talent sitting on the pine. So to continue the wood analogy, it was a good win for Manly. So they're going to be a dark horse, possibly one of the few teams that can get anywhere near to Storm. Panthers are, I don't think, sure things anymore, as I said, without Cleary and Luai for extended period. And the Rabbitohs are closing, and I'm starting to wonder where the grand final will be, because I might have to book a flight on my birthday, the grand final, coincidentally. So I'll get to wherever they're playing it.
COVID restrictions allowing.
Of course, yeah, I'd never break a bubble to just to watch a grand final of the Rabbitohs, I promise.
You got your fingers crossed there, Paul?
Something's crossed under the thing here, I'll tell you what. So, yeah.
Right.
I'm hopeful that I can get to wherever it's being played. If the Rabbitohs continue their form, and the fact that we weren't overly affected by Origin with Reynolds and Walker, the wily old dog Wayne Bennett would be smiling immensely about that decision by Fittler to not call them up, because we also have Adam Reynolds playing his last game for the Rabbitohs. It'll likely not be in Sydney, unfortunately, for Rabbitohs fanatics. I might have gone up for that game because he's been so much of a talisman for the Rabbitohs. But the Rabbitohs will want to farewell Adam Reynolds the same way I predicted the Storm would for Cronk and Smith. So watch this space. The Rabbitohs are firming as premiership contenders.
Two things, Paul. Before we look at today's games, and I certainly want to look at those, the whisper is that Queensland will be where the rest of this season's rugby league games are played.
That's what could affect the whole comp, because I wouldn't want to be in charge of security for anywhere near Cavill Avenue to have 300 footballers. So I just can't see it working. But they'd have to just be disciplined enough, and they'll have to have enough security. You'd want 24-hour security on some of these players to make sure that they stay in their bubbles. It is quite sad for the families. I think it's still pending whether the families can get in. You've got Benji Marshall can't go anywhere, but he's got his wife and young child in Sydney. So the Rabbitohs won't have him for some time until he gets approval from our saviour, Anastasia Polashek, as we'll call her now. So there's a lot of pendings. I tell you who it won't affect, though, the Storm. They could be based on the moon and they could still win the comp. They're so disciplined. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, Warriors Panthers at 150 today.
Well, that's going to be an interesting match, particularly given the absence of the Panthers' main halves. The Warriors need to win this to be any chance of making the eights. They are very unpredictable. Probably the Port Adelaide of the NRL. I actually think they're a chance, the Warriors. They'll go close with Reece Walsh at the back and Tabasa Sheck is playing 5'8". I think they'll go close, but I think the Panthers might just have enough class to hold on. 24-22, I'll give you a score on that one. But don't be surprised if the Warriors, in the last chance saloon, get a win.
Broncos Wests.
Well, there's a big trophy at stake for this one, and it's actually going to the loser. I'd call it the wooden spoon, because the way your Dogs are starting to find some form, you might be able to avoid the spoon, Professor, believe it or not. So the Broncos and Tigers, I think the Broncos playing at home should have a bit too much for the Tigers. Bad timing. Amazon Prime's released one of those fly-on-the-wall documentaries featuring the West Tigers. It wouldn't be the most inspiring of shows given the year that they've had, the Tigers, unless you want to watch a team fade from promising to putrid. I don't know how many viewers it'll get.
Your thoughts on the scoreline? Final scoreline?
It could be anything. I think the Broncos are starting to find some form. 24-12, I think the Broncos will win that. And then, of course, we've got the game I'll be watching, Rabbitohs and Dogs. Is this the last leg of your multi, did you say, Professor?
Yes, Paul. Put the super on the Dogs, do you think?
Oh, $10 so you can retire. I tell you what, you'll be a live backdrop of the Bahamas behind you next week. It'll be, because I just can't see it. You've got Latrell Mitchell, a rested up Cody Walker playing as well as I've ever seen. Adam Reynolds outside him playing his last year. Damien Cook's finding some form. Dane Gaggai's playing to impress new suitors. And Cameron Murray, who I think will play and captain Australia one day. So that's what you're up against, Professor. Yeah. I can't see the Dogs getting anywhere near the Rabbitohs. Sorry.
I would say the best bet is whether the Rabbitohs will be over or under 50.
It's probably a good bet, or you could bet on the colour of Gus Gould's suit. Perhaps that's the only thing that might save you. He'll be in the stands watching or commentating with his red pen. So if I'm a Dogs player, I'd want to play as well as I can. There's generally some there might be a big chance of biff between these two clubs. They don't like each other much, but I just can't see it happening, Professor. I think you'd be looking forward to next year.
Okay.
Paul, as a rugby league watcher, the appointment to Gus Gould at the Bulldogs is a great one for us watching the game, isn't it? Because it means that he will no longer commentate, surely. If there's a bigger bell end commentating sport, apart from Brian Taylor, I'd be surprised. He's just so bad.
Did you watched his pre-game Origin little spiel that he does? He turns into Anthony Robbins in a worse suit and saying you've got to find something within you. He actually quoted Game of Thrones. Someone's got to give him the mail. It's a TV show. You know, he's got 3 a year he's got to prepare for. He could have called on Winston Churchill. He could have called on some of the finest speakers of all time. He's called on a TV show. And
finally,
calling on Wizards and Warriors to help. Not the New Zealand Warriors, but he's been hitting the magic mushrooms, I think, Gus, because he's quoting Game of Thrones. Give me strength.
And while we're on commentary, can we talk about Joey Johns? Can he finally just be retired off to do whatever he wants to do, because he's had another slip of the tongue, and they're never tasteful with Joey. But the use of the Boston Strangler,
yeah. At least it wasn't an Ivan Milat reference, but he's working at more clubs than the Living End, you know. So he's at all these clubs as an advisor for halfbacks. So you'd hope that he could just keep busy with that, because his analysis is actually quite good, but he just has these gaps. Probably Sam Newman you'd have to compare him to, but whether Sam Newman was a great commentator, Joey Johns' football knowledge is impeccable. It's just that he's an idiot at times, you know. And I met him once. He was very dismissive, and I wasn't a big fan when I met him, but he certainly knowledge of the game is exceptional, and that's what he passes on to the halfbacks that he tutors. But those gaffes, I mean, the Boston Strangler, come on.
Okay, Paul, thanks for that. Much appreciated. Judge, you circulated an email during the week about the US Hall of Fame racing trainer, Bob Baffert. His suspension by the New York Racing Association was overturned by a court. Perhaps you'd like to take us through that.
Yeah, thanks, Professor. It was noteworthy mainly because of the who this person is. He's the Bart Cummings of American racing. I think, Dan, he's won something like 7 Kentuckys. He's an outstanding trainer. But what was really interesting was that the court very quickly shut off the suspension. And I was just sort of interested that A, it happened, B, this will probably end up in litigation. The last time this happened, the litigation took 4 years to run through the courts. And it was just an interesting counterpoint to Australian racing, which seems to have its act together. And these things just don't happen in Australia. We've got a very mature racing system. The courts generally leave racing alone. There's very few times that the courts get involved. But America, the courts can't help themselves. They get involved in everything. And they've got involved in this case. And I've just looked at it, and I think it's got mud written all over it, where I think 2 or 3 years' time, we'll still be talking about the Bob Baffert suspension. Interested in your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this one, a judge comes down to the due process. Accused and found guilty before he was given all the lawyers and everything could jump involved with it and do all the evidence and everything else relative to it. So that's ultimately what this comes down to. And that sometimes definitely plays in the favor of this type of situation. It draws out the process, as you said, and allows them to keep doing what they're going to do. But obviously the suspicions are going to be there.
Extraordinary, Dan. In fact, the judge said their adjudication proceedings prior to any action are imperative, and that didn't happen. So you can't believe that somebody as high profile as this guy, a horse as high profile as his horse, they don't have due process, and they just went ahead in suspension, and they said we had to act quickly. Well, the difference between acting quickly and acting smartly, and that's what they've done. Gelding, what do you reckon?
Yeah, couple of questions for Dan. Different racing jurisdictions have different kind of ways. Here in Victoria, we have the stewards have a hearing. Then if the parties are aggrieved by that, they can go to the racing tribunal, which is normally held by former county court or Supreme Court judges. So you tend to get that, they get their hearing with the stewards, and then they get a further appearance. And, of course, then they can go onto the courts if they want to. A couple of things for Dan and you, John, as our certain legal advisor there that I found interesting about it. They said he was held, they've returned his good standing in racing. Like here you either just get suspended or fined or whatever. But
it's done
Dan, is this kind of...
It's done nothing of the sort. He hasn't been found innocent. It's just been found the due process hasn't been followed. What used to be a difficulty is that particular drug found in the horse's system was double the allowable limits, and unless something odd comes up, Gelding, I think he's still gone.
Yeah, another thing, John, was interesting. Can you tell us what a picogram is? Like they found 21 picograms of betamitose in the horse, which he said came from an ointment, an antifungal ointment he was treating the horse with for dermatitis. But I notice now the New York Racing Association holds 3 racetracks: Belmont Park, where the third leg or the second leg of the Triple Crown is, Aqueduct, and Saratoga. And from that judgment now, he seems to be allowed to enter horses at Saratoga, but said nothing about the other 2 racetracks. And yeah, as you said, it's going to drag on and drag on. But I noticed that they said it's kind of not involved the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution in the fact that there wasn't a fair process. So It was very interesting. You have rightly described him as the Bart Cummings of American racing. There's just not a bigger name there, and this couldn't have happened in a bigger race. This is one of the world's icon races that really puts US racing under the spotlight.
Just in Australia, Gillen, we've got Cameron and Hogan, the High Court decision, which basically said courts should get out of sport. In America, they love their constitution. They can't get enough of their constitution. And when in doubt, in America, just plead the constitution.
Is it the Bible?
You can always find somewhere in judging the Constitution. You can always find somewhere to get an appeal or get something delayed. No doubt about it.
What do you think, Dan? In America, is it big news over there?
It's horse racing is really big news, Gelding, when you're getting to the Triple Crown, but when you're not in the Triple Crown, it's not as big as news. I mean, so Bob Baffert's known in horse racing like Roger Penske is in IndyCar racing. I mean, it is the name in horse racing. So it obviously has gotten play here a little bit in the national sports news, but not the national news in that respect. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what his horses do and how long he's able to race without much interference here. I mean, I think you were saying, Australia's got more of a governing body for horse racing. I mean, the United States horse racing seems to be very much like boxing. Every state's got their own racing agency, racing entity that can determine go or no go relative to a trainer or a horse being able to race in a race, and that's what's happening here in New York.
Couldn't have been a bigger race than the Kentucky Derby, could it?
No, Kentucky Derby is the biggest race of the Triple Crown. I mean, it's the first one to get you going, get you interested, and get you watching. The reason you watch the other two is obviously to see if somebody. Yeah, it is because you want to see whoever wins Kentucky Derby whether they're going to be able to win the Triple Crown. So that's the key reason you watch it.
Gelding, do you think signs that Bob may not be the full quitter when you model yourself on Ric Flair? Like the glasses that he wears, and like seriously, he could be Ric Flair.
David, be careful. As you get older, you might have white hair as well.
No, I'm not saying there's a bad thing about it. I'm just saying that he does model himself on the nature boy Ric Flair. So maybe the judges think worried.
He's certainly a very flashy dresser and things like that. But that may be part of what he's selling. He's selling his product as one of the world's best trainers, and presentation. He certainly presents himself in a very, 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 very elegant manner.
I'm not sure we should use the word product either.
Gelding, just in answer to your question, a picogram is 1 trillionth of a gram.
A trillionth.
1 trillionth of a gram. So
this had 21
picograms.
Gelding, it's a droplet in a swimming pool, in a 50-metre swimming pool.
Yeah.
Look at it that way.
Yeah.
How do you detect that? Glory be.
Now, Judge, it was interesting that the judge in this case said that the public has no interest in having the integrity of sport enforced by unconstitutional means.
Yeah, that was it, Professor. Go to the Constitution, and it's an unappealable type decision because it was unconstitutional in the sense that fair process wasn't given. So I don't think that's going to be overturned. However, the case itself will just go through a multitude of appeals, and I think ultimately he'll be found guilty. But that's just throwing this question open to the panel in general.
Baffert's now entitled to enter for the Saratoga meetings that started on the 16th of July, two days ago. What does that say for racing in New York, especially that he's now entitled to compete with such a cloud hanging over his head?
Personally, isn't it? It's not a. I think it's quite fair, and as John said, I think he'll be found guilty further down the track. But until that due process is in, surely he should be able to continue with his livelihood.
Okay,
that's exactly it.
Until innocent until proven guilty.
That's it.
I don't know.
You
I'll
got
leave that to the legal minds.
Well, hopefully Dennis Denuto is available for him.
Well, that's a good suggestion, Coutta.
The vibe. It's the
We might-
The
vibe.
vibe.
We might stay with you, Coutta.
Right. Okay.
Tennis, just finalising Wimbledon. The Joker won through. What odds for the Grand Slam?
Well, I hope none. But geez, he'd be a very short price favourite to do it. He was tested here a couple of times. Let's be honest, he was tested a couple of times, and Aussie Mateo pushed him. But at the end of the day, this guy is just as good as we've seen. I think he'll probably do the Grand Slam. He's not playing at the Olympics, I don't think, so he can't do the Gold Slam, whatever they call it. And probably robs the Olympics of a showcase. But again, no crowd, so it really doesn't matter. We did tip at the start of the tournament, I think, Professor, off the top of our head, that we did say that we thought that this would happen. We did think that it would be a Djokovic and Barty double. I wish I had have backed it, but obviously I didn't. So I'm still chasing my tail. But yeah, he was sensational at the end of the day. Grass court. It isn't what it used to be with serve volley. They did show some highlights of Ivan Izovic versus Pat Rafter, and the path to the net was certainly worn a lot. It was a lot darker, or a lot browner, the pathway to the net in those days, whereas today the baselines are just cactus, and the green around the net. Probably those that grew up in the grass court era certainly don't see it as a grass court event anymore.
All right, Coutta, the tennis world now turns to the Olympics. So not only rowing we're discussing today at the Olympics, but also tennis. The women's team looks a trifle stronger than the men's, given that Alex de Minaur is out of the team after being diagnosed with COVID during the week.
Yeah, so de Minaur tested positive in Spain, of all places. So he's withdrawn from the Olympics. Obviously, Kyrgios also withdrew. So with two singles players down, they're not being replaced. But de Minaur is being replaced for the doubles. So he's being replaced by a bloke by the name of Max Purcell. Purcell's probably better known as playing doubles with Luke Saville, but he's coming off his best result on tour in a challenger, having made, I think it was the semi-final. So he'll partner up with John Peers, and Max has got a pretty big serve on him. So let's see how they go. And I just saw that the track and field team have been, there's been a COVID scare, and they're all been locked down. So I still can't believe the Olympics is going ahead. We've discussed it previously on here at nauseum. I assume John Coates is over there, so we're in safe hands. And of course, the great man, Dick Pound, he will be running the show and make sure that it's just this roaring success. But I don't think you'd want to be on a watch where you've got an athlete that gets COVID or anything like that. I don't know, Dan, you might have a different thought, but really as an organisation, are they really just saying two fingers up to the health organisation to run this event?
Yeah, David, it really feels like it. I mean, Japan's spiking in cases of COVID. They don't have the vaccine readily available. There's such a small percentage of the Japanese that actually have the vaccine in their arms. No fans in the stands. They're just going to bring everybody over there. Hope that they can get this thing competed, and I would anticipate that they're going to be testing athletes every day, very similar to what we did here in American college sports this past year. But it's an environment that just isn't conducive mentally, particularly with all these athletes coming from all over the world. It's not like college sports here, where everybody's kind of in the same region or same area of the country. These are people coming from 100 countries or more all over the world. So it is crazy. I mean, we talked about this months ago, whether we'd have the Olympics or not. I understand Japan spent all this money to build these facilities. There's broadcast rights that are in the billions of dollars and all this other stuff. But it's just amazing that they're going to try to make this happen. And, one of the things I realized this week too, guys, I mean, the Winter Olympics are just around the corner. I mean, we're going back to back here with both these. So if this thing spikes again here, and as we get close to the winter, it's going to be crazy.
And Dan, just another one for you. It's coming through in the news lines at the moment that there's been a shooting, or they're at a baseball game. I think it's outside the stadium though. So, but I don't know what you guys go through over there, mate. It's just frightening.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously inside the stadium, to get inside the stadium, you got to go through metal detectors. You got to do all the things to make sure you're going into a safe environment. But the shooting, it's happened at the San Diego Padres Washington Nationals game in DC outside the ballpark. 4 people have been shot. They're trying to keep people in the stadium because this happened outside the stadium. But guys, it just gets tiresome. I mean, in so many ways, all these shootings, all these things that go on with guns out here, that this is just crazy that now in the nation's capital is a shooting outside the ballpark. And, people now are probably fearful of even walking outside. So it's, just a lot of news like that we're seeing too much of here.
Yeah. Coutta, just before we leave tennis, thoughts on whether Australia can medal in the tennis? And if so, what will they win?
Ooh, I don't know if we'll medal.
Won't Ash Barty get a gold?
Yeah.
Is she competing? Is she going?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's there. We've got Barty Tomljanovic.
Sorry, Ash and Oceana. Well, you would hope that Ash would win it. The way she played Wimbledon and the way she got through Wimbledon, I think, was a real positive, Professor. Obviously, going into Wimbledon under a bit of a cloud and getting through 7 matches or what it is to get to the final is a super effort. And we know how much representing a country means to us. So I think, yeah, she's an excellent chance to win gold. And Anna will go quite well, and I'm not sure she'll medal, but her Wimbledon performance probably gives some pretty good hopes and momentum for her as well.
Well, and Sam Stosur's her performance in the doubles at Wimbledon, surely in her 5th Olympics, Coutta, must be a chance to medal.
Well, hopefully if she does medal, it means that she'll then retire. Sam is still playing singles, which just astounds me that she continues to put herself through the torture of it, because her doubles record and the ability to play doubles is second to none. Her volley, her serve and volleying is just. But anyway, that's beside the point. So, well, who's she playing doubles with? I haven't looked at it. So,
Storm Sanders.
Oh, Storm Sanders made the semi-finals of the mixed doubles at. Made the semi-finals of the ladies doubles at Wimbledon. So again, someone else that's in form. So,
Every possibility.
I think, in the words of the Could Have Beens, EPC, every possible chance.
And not so confident with the men's side.
No, I wouldn't have thought so with the men's. We've got Duckworth and I was going to say John Millman.
Yes. Millman, Pearce, Duckworth, Saville, Purcell.
So the men's, I wouldn't have thought we'd get a medal. We might in the men's doubles, maybe, because men's doubles, as we know, is a bit of a lottery. If you're serving big, you'll probably win most matches. So on their day, Purcell and Pearce might medal up. So it'd be interesting to see how they go.
Okay, Gelding, we might round the show out with you today.
Yes, Professor.
What are your red hot tips for today's races?
Well, a couple have got up, Professor, what we sent through at Warracknabeal today. Miss Cheviot's just got popped in the first, unfortunately. Sportsfan Radio's own Craig Robinson has rides in race 2 and 3. Renault in race 2 and Baron of Bedford in race 3, both around about the $8, $6 mark. So it could be good each way bets, Professor.
He's in good form, Gelding.
Hey?
He's in good form.
Oh, riding well. Talk to you about that tomorrow, Professor. Got a little idea in the back of my head.
Okay.
In Pakenham, it's a fantastic meeting, solely jumps racing. I like Light Pillar in race 2, which won by 10 lengths. So I hope you're on, David. Short but sweet. In the races coming up, I like race 3, number 9, Z Star. Race 4, I like Mawani Machine to beat Eckhart. Could be a good Quinella. Paul, you might get your money back from Flying Agent this week in race 5, but I'll let that one go around again. It was too disappointing last start. Race 6, we like number 2, Big Blue. And in the last race 7, a good Quinella Professor. Only 6 going around, but number 4, Social Element, trained by Gay Waterhouse, but up against the horse called a Blaze. So I reckon they could be a good Quinella.
Okay, and before we close the show, Dan, can we have a spot score from Game 5 of the NBA Finals?
That you can. 5 minutes, 44 seconds left to go. 113, 105. Milwaukee Bucks are shooting 62% for the game. So they are just putting the ball in the bucket. Just a fantastic game, and looking forward to the last 5 minutes of this one.
So with 5 minutes to go, Dan, and given your record with predictions, who are you suggesting might win this contest?
Well, I'm always, as you guys have learned, always go opposite of what I pick. So I still like the home court. I still like Phoenix, even though they're down 8 with 5 to go. So,
all right. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen, and thanks, Judge, for organising our special guest, Jack Kelly. That was terrific, and we really must get him back on the show again.
Absolutely.
Until next Sunday. A very good.